The jungle was unforgiving. Thick green foliage choked the air. The twisted wreckage of the Huey helicopter lay amongst the dense vegetation. The smell of aviation fuel and smoke filled the air, a grim testament to the violence of the crash. The rotor blades, bent and broken, were a stark reminder of the mechanical failure that brought them down.
Davis, report!
Captain Miller, the pilot, struggled to free himself from his harness. He was dazed but miraculously alive. His eyes scanned the cockpit, his heart sinking with each passing second. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Davis, was pinned in his seat, his legs crushed by the mangled instrument panel. Miller's voice was urgent, desperate, but the only response was the groan of the helicopter's dying engine and the ominous silence from his co-pilot. Miller fought against the tangled metal and wires, trying to reach Davis. His co-pilot was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Davis's breathing was shallow, his voice a strained whisper.
I can't feel my legs, Miller.
His words confirmed Miller's worst fears. Davis was badly hurt. Time was running out. They were down in enemy territory, their location unknown. Miller knew they needed immediate medical evacuation, but freeing Davis was proving impossible. They needed help, and they needed it fast. The radio crackled to life. It was the calm, steady voice of Sergeant Thompson, the pararescue jump master.
Shadow 1, this is Razor. We're receiving your emergency beacon. What's your status?
Miller took a deep breath, trying to control his rising panic.
Razor, this is Shadow 1. We're down, hard. Davis is trapped, multiple injuries. Need immediate medevac.
Roger that, Shadow 1. We're prepping the PJs for immediate deployment. Can you give us a visual on your location?
Negative, Razor. Canopy's too thick. We're surrounded by jungle.
Miller knew the risks involved in deploying the pararescue team into such dense vegetation, but they were their only hope. The distinct roar of the approaching rescue helicopter was a beacon of hope. Through a small break in the canopy, Miller saw the figures of the pararescue jumpers, PJs, descending towards them, their parachutes blossoming against the sky. The first PJ, Staff Sergeant Ramirez, hit the ground running, quickly followed by Airman First Class Lee. They reached the crash site, immediately assessing the situation, but their arrival had not gone unnoticed. The silence of the jungle was shattered by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. The enemy was close. Section 5, fighting back.
Contact!
Miller roared, grabbing his rifle. He returned fire, providing cover for the PJs as they worked feverishly to free Davis.
Ramirez, a combat veteran with nerves of steel, wasted no time. He skillfully administered a morphine injection to Davis, easing his pain.
Lee, though new to combat, showed remarkable courage, assisting Ramirez in rigging a makeshift harness to extricate Davis from the wreckage. The air was thick with tension, the smell of gunpowder mixing with the ever-present scent of the jungle. Every second felt like an eternity. Section 6, stabilizing the wounded. With a final heave, they pulled Davis free. He cried out in pain as they carefully laid him on the ground. Ramirez quickly examined him, his face grim. Davis had lost a lot of blood.
We need to get him out of here now.
Ramirez shouted above the din of the firefight. They loaded Davis onto a stretcher and prepared to move him to the makeshift landing zone. But their ordeal was far from over. The rescue helicopter hovered overhead, its rotors beating back the foliage.
They loaded Davis, his life hanging in the balance.
Miller, despite his own injuries, refused to leave his crew behind. He climbed aboard, the jungle floor falling away beneath them. Inside the cramped cabin, the roar of the engine was deafening.
Ramirez, working with the precision of a surgeon, fought to stabilize Davis. He needed a blood transfusion, and he needed it now. "We're losing him!" Ramirez shouted over the engine noise.
The base hospital came into view, a cluster of low buildings against the vast expanse of the jungle. The pilot, his face a mask of concentration, maneuvered the helicopter towards the landing pad. But the landing zone was in chaos. Vehicles were parked haphazardly, obstructing the helicopter's approach. Medical personnel seemed unsure, their movements confused.
Clear the LZ! Clear the LZ! Miller screamed into the radio, his voice laced with frustration.
The helicopter touched down, kicking up a whirlwind of dust and debris. The doors were thrown open and they rushed Davis into the hospital, but the scene inside did little to ease their anxieties. The medical staff seemed ill-equipped and unprepared for the severity of Davis's injuries. Supplies were scarce, the operating room was not even ready.
We need a surgical team! Now! Ramirez barked, his patience wearing thin.
As Davis was wheeled into surgery, Miller slumped against a wall, his body finally succumbing to exhaustion and the adrenaline that had kept him going. He closed his eyes, the sounds of the chaotic hospital fading into the background. He thought of the crash, the fear, the desperate fight for survival. He thought of the bravery of his crew, the selflessness of the PJs. They had stared death in the face and emerged, forever bound by the shared experience. His thoughts drifted to Davis, his fate still uncertain. All they could do now was wait and pray. The mission had been a success, but it had come at a terrible cost. And as Miller knew all too well, the jungle was always unforgiving.